It's been a while since we actually uploaded a podcast to our channel. I would say about a month now. So I decided today, instead of actually doing a podcast, which we should be doing, we're actually going to do a video of how we go through the process of making our podcast. Just in case anyone else wants to know or maybe do their own podcast, here are the steps and tips of how we do our podcast. Basically today, what we're going to do is
I wouldn't even get it. I wouldn't even get it. You know what, man?
So, like many things, inspiration is where we start with our podcast. So, this is where the whole podcast starts. This means coming up with the questions and the topics that we will talk about. Most of the topics or questions just come from what's been on our mind lately. Also, we gather topic discussions from any heated debates we might have with people around us. So, maybe you're in a group with someone and you guys are having a really heated debate. The group is split into two decisions and you're like, hold on, wait. This would be something really good to talk about on a podcast. Reason being is because it's not going to be black and white. Obviously you can already see that there are two different sides to this debate. So maybe it'd be even better to talk about it on a podcast and really dissect it. So that's one way we come up with our inspiration. After that, it's just a matter of gathering the people that I think would be a good fit for the topic or the question that we're going to be speaking on. Yeah, that's pretty much where we start with the podcast. That's the foundation. The next step for our podcast is vision. And what I mean by vision is just having an idea of what direction the topics or questions your podcast is going to go in. So basically, if you ask a certain question, then you got to know what arguments are going to be on both sides. I could see where some people would say this kind of takes away the authenticity, however you say that word, of the podcast, but really it's just your thoughts before a question, because you do think about stuff on a daily basis, and realistically all you're doing is thinking about it a little ahead of time, so you don't have to think as much during the podcast. So that's what I mean when I say vision. So this is where the creative thinking comes into play. When we're coming up with our podcast, we have to be able to structure the questions and topics in a way to make it engaging for both participants and the viewers, while also making it easy to follow. Most of my questions will consist of what do you think about this or that, or just straight up yes or no questions that we elaborate further on. Better you know that you're guests and be prepared, the better you'll be off with the podcast. So that's just the second step, having a vision of how the podcast will go. This step is a lot more self-explanatory. It's just going to be to schedule and record your podcast, but it's a lot easier said than done. Depending on how many guests are coming, you want to give them ample time to make sure that they can make it and set a date that they're going to be available on, and you will also be available to work with. I would say giving a week in advance is a good time, and it allows them to tell you if they can or cannot come / make it to your podcast. And then I would also say a cutoff date is necessary. So if they could let you know maybe 2 days before the podcast, then they could say if they're coming, confirm if they're coming, or tell you if they can't make it, which is an unfortunate circumstance. But you should always have your schedule ready and be able to work around any misfortunes or any other obstacles that get in the way of your schedule, because there will be obstacles. That's just how life is. Nothing ever goes 100% according to plan, so you just got to be able to work around it and come up with solutions as you go. So I say 2 days before the recording date, everything should be finalized. And for the recording part, make sure your guests are comfortable with sharing their thoughts and opinions on the podcast. Otherwise, the podcast will lose some of its leverage and it won't be as authentic, because they don't really feel comfortable sharing what they actually think. So make sure they are comfortable doing that much at the very least. Okay, so the next part after you've got the recording out of the way is the editing. So this is the most time-consuming part of the whole process by far. You have to go through all the content and start cutting and trimming any parts that aren't as engaging, and you have to make sure it is engaging the whole way through. Also looking out for anything that shouldn't be said on the podcast, depending on your channel preferences. I like to look at it as more of an opportunity to add some creativity into the podcast, and also to just listen to all the good answers that were said, because sometimes when you're actually a part of the podcast, you don't have the opportunity to really listen and focus so much on everything that's going on, because you got to think while you're having this discussion. So I also like to have the editing done preferably 1 or 2 days before the release date, so I can let some of the guests preview and make sure that they're cool with everything said in the podcast, just so there's no I gotta put it up and then take it down after. That would be really unfortunate. So I do like to have it ready and show the guests before I upload it. Lastly, it's just a matter of posting all of this work done, that included of scheduled and recorded it and editing it and preparing it. You know, all you gotta do now is just post it. And then for our videos, our primary source we post it to is YouTube. So I have to make sure the thumbnail is set. And then I also like to, in my editing phase, grab out some like small clips that were, you know, maybe the most interesting part, like a minute or so of that, and just grab it and put it on TikTok or Instagram as well for anyone who wants to engage with us but doesn't want to sit through a whole podcast in its entirety of half an hour to an hour long, which is very understandable. And then we try to promote it as much as possible in the first 24 hours. So that's pretty much our whole process for making the podcast. And, you know, there's also other ways, you know, you could have this done. Making a podcast, there could be less steps involved, there could be more steps involved. This is just our process. Take what you will, take what you want out of this one. And, you know, hopefully you could tune into one of our next podcasts. So hey, catch y'all in the next one.